Why did I take this path? For centuries, the legendary Monte Sacro treasure remained lost. A mysterious box that vanished in 1327, said to hold not gold, but a secret powerful enough to change the fate of Europe. Everyone believed it would never be found again until that morning. It's hard to remember exactly which morning it was. Maybe it was just one of those small awakenings. Awakenings that had quietly repeated themselves over the years. That morning wasn't any different. I poured my tea, opened my window slightly, and the slightly humid morning air of Rome drifted inside. There was a strange calm in that moment. Those ancient stones that wrapped the city, the way they felt just before the sun fully rose. I've always loved that time. Everything seems asleep, yet secretly breathing. The past waits there, a little more patient, a little more present. Inside me, a spark small but determined flickered. Begin, it whispered. Tell it. It wasn't exactly me saying it, more like a voice that had been sitting inside for years, something that whispered from between the books. No joke. I've spent long years in academia, working among archives. I'm someone who knows the smell of books, the texture of parchment, but this time, it was different. It wasn't the urge to write an academic paper. It was a deeper search. I wanted to take a story, a voice, maybe even a secret, and offer it gently to people. If you're going to craft a bedtime story, I told myself, it must spark curiosity and soothe at the same time. And at that moment, the idea of Sleepless History Friend was born in my mind. But I had no idea what kind of story it would become, how deep I would go, or where it would lead. I pulled on my shoes, grabbed my old notebook. I always take notes. I never feel comfortable without my small, thick cover notebook. And I walked. When I say I walked to Rome, what I really mean is a few steps, some metro lines, and a short stroll. But that morning, it felt long and meaningful. Since the air was still cool, I pulled my jacket collar up a little more. You can't expect to run into an old archive clerk by chance, but life loves surprises. I didn't know it yet, but the small chain of events I would encounter that day would begin the entire story. When I reached the stone gate of the Vatican, my heart beat slightly faster than usual, not with excitement, but with a gentle tremble of curiosity. When I entered the archive building, the old smell was still in the corridors, leather bindings, dried ink, tiny remnants of candle wax. That smell always felt like coming home, confusing, yet comforting. I had first met Don Marcello in that building, not tall, but with deep eyes and a voice like home. He was there that day too. He saw me and nodded lightly, and in that moment, I noticed something small and shiny. He was hiding in his pocket, a key. "Good morning, Professor," Don Marcello said, his voice, as always, soft. They say early mornings are good for working. Maybe he said it just to say something, but I felt something shift inside me. That key, a tiny but heavy object. It looked old, the surface worn as if polished with parchment, a small 7-pointed star motif, and the date 1327 engraved on it. For a historian, that number isn't just a date, it's a calling. Images of the Middle Ages flickered in my mind, hatted monks, stone bridges, long walks. When Don Marcello handed me the key, there was hesitation on his face, then a sense of relief. "Use this at night," he said. "Tell no one. We only give it to the one who comes searching." From the seriousness in his tone, I knew this wasn't a joke. The first thing I felt was the coldness of the metal. Not meaningless cold, it carried the scent of life lived. Objects like this are usually worthless or incredibly valuable. The second thing I felt, cliche as it sounds, was that the key reminded me of a door. What door? I asked myself. I didn't know, but I felt the presence of a door. Curiosity never stays quiet for long. In the late afternoon, walking again through the archive corridors at the hour Don Marcello told me, I kept the key hidden in my pocket, repeating his words. As I searched for the doors, going down the stairs, every crack in the stones beneath my feet pulled me deeper. What if this is a trap? I wondered. No answer, only my footsteps echoed back. And then, the small door. I wasn't surprised to find it, but a part of me felt a quiet joy. The door was narrow, rusty hinges, an old Latin sign hanging above it. My finger trembled, a real human tremor, and I slid the key into the lock. The turning sound was pleasant, a simple click, perfectly suited to Rome's night air. Old, quiet, heavy. Inside, a narrow room, no light. Shelves rose along the walls, but they weren't filled with books. Small metal boxes sat instead, each labeled in short Latin phrases, most readable, some faded. In the center, an old table, a thin layer of dust on top, except for one box, because it had no dust, as if someone had touched it recently. Its label read, Tesoro di Monte Sacro 1327, the sacred mountain treasure. Not an ordinary name, one of those names wrapped in myth. I opened the box. Inside, a small leather pouch, sealed with red wax. Before breaking it, I pulled out the parchment. The parchment was thick, edges worn, ink dark and clotted. My eyes caught the first line. If these lines have been found, know that the fate of the world will turn once more. I smiled. Strange, serious, grand words. But history often hides great meaning in small hands. In the middle of the page, a hand-drawn route from Rome through small valleys toward the Swiss Alps. At the end of the path, a torn edge, a monastery symbol, abandoned, absent from maps. And that was where everything truly began. Behind the hidden doors, as I slowly walked down the long corridor after leaving the archive room, the cold stone floor echoed softly beneath my steps. You know that corridor, the high ceilings, the century-old paintings watching silently from the walls, a dim passage glowing under warm yellow lights. Normally, walking there gives a person a quiet sense of safety, a feeling of order, of strength built over centuries. But that day, for the very first time, the corridor felt narrow, almost as if it were gently pushing me towards something unknown. Inside my notebook, hidden between the pages, was the map with burnt edges. In my pocket, the strange warm stone. And echoing in the back of my mind, that mysterious sentence, the fate of the world will turn once again. With every step I took, I felt as though I was walking deeper, further, into a secret that had been waiting for centuries. When I reached the end of the corridor, I turned right toward the staircase. I needed to go up to the second floor, the place where the older archive records were kept. Almost no one ever went there. For years, I had rarely seen a single person in that quiet area. But that day, someone was standing in front of the door. A dark robe, a thin red stripe at the collar, a slightly hunched posture. His head lowered just enough that I couldn't see his face. As I walked past him, I lifted my head to greet him, but he didn't react, not even a breath. He seemed completely lost in thought. Or maybe he was listening. Just for a moment, the idea crossed my mind. Was he the one who listened to me in the archive room? I had no proof, only a quiet, unsettling feeling. I stepped inside the office, closed the door, and leaned against it. Even the silence outside felt different, heavier, older. The room was narrow and filled with books. The air carried a mixture of ink, dust, and aged leather. Sometimes those scents comfort me. Other times, they feel like I'm touching a secret that has been asleep for centuries. I sat at my desk, opened my notebook, and gently spread the map across the table. The burnt corner crumbled softly, leaving tiny pieces behind. At the top of the map, the small drawing of a church caught my eye. Old symbols like this usually meant the place truly existed, but when a name was missing, it meant the opposite. Someone didn't want this church to be found. As I examined the lower part with a magnifying glass, a faint path revealed itself. So thin, so subtle you could only see it if you were patient or trained to notice the things others miss. The path crossed a small hill, passed through a quiet valley, and stopped at a symbol, a tiny dot inside a circle. It felt familiar, but the meaning stayed just out of reach. Sacred, forbidden, protected, perhaps all at once. I reached into my pocket and took out the stone with the 3 carved lines. Again, that faint warmth. But this time, something else happened. When I placed the stone on the map, its edges aligned perfectly with a missing part, not by chance, not by luck. It was meant to be there, as if the stone had once belonged to the map itself. It wasn't just an object, it was a sign, a key, a piece of a much older puzzle. Just then, a soft knock on the door, once, then again. The sound was gentle, unhurried, yet unmistakably clear. In a place where no one ever visited, the knock felt almost unreal, not demanding entry but asking a question, or giving a warning. I rose from my chair, opened the door, and found no one, only a single yellowed piece of paper on the floor. One sentence written on it, "This path may not lead you back." A shiver ran through my hand. Who had left it? How? When? No footsteps, no motion, nothing. I picked up the paper, returned inside, and for the first time locked the door. I sat down again. The map, the stone, the parchment, all waiting quietly in front of me. By now, I no longer believed they had come together by coincidence. There was something older here, a chain stretching through centuries. Perhaps one link had broken, but the rest of the chain was still alive. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. Curiosity can strengthen a person or paralyze them. I didn't know which one I was feeling, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I could no longer turn back. The moment I decided to uncover this secret, I had made a choice, and that choice had brought me to the threshold of a door that only a handful of people in history had ever stepped through. The Shadow Man and the first traces. When I returned home that night, I had a strange mix of feelings inside me. One part of me was excited, as if I were standing at the edge of an ancient story torn from history, but the other part of me was tense, as if someone had been watching me. As soon as I entered the house, I stood by the door for a while without turning on the lights. This was a habit I had developed over the years. When I came home from outside, I would first listen to the silence, then take my steps. That day it felt not like a habit, but a necessity. The silence was normal. My home was in an old building, but it was reliable. Still, because of what I experienced in the archive that day, every shadow felt a little longer, every sound a little clearer. I took off my coat and sat at my desk. I opened the map again. The burnt edge still crumbled under my fingertip. I took the stone out of my pocket again. This time the stone was cold. I couldn't make sense of it, for the stone that had been warm in the morning to now be cold. Either the stone wasn't an ordinary object, or I was interpreting things wrong. As I sat at the desk, my eyes drifted toward the bookshelf near the window. On the corner of the shelf, a book that should have been on the very bottom was lying on the floor. Everything had been in place when I left in the morning. My books never move because I keep them organized, but that book, it looked slightly slid out of its place. I approached it. I picked it up. There were fingerprints on its dusty cover, but they didn't look like mine. The fingerprints were longer, thinner, and the prints looked fresh, as if they had just carved a path through the dust. The thought that passed through me at that moment was so strong that I literally felt a chill run through me. Someone has been in my home, but nothing was stolen. My desk, my books, my drawers, everything was exactly as it was. This was actually even more unsettling, because not knowing what someone was looking for when they didn't come to steal was more disturbing than knowing what had been stolen. I placed the book back. Then I returned to the desk. When I looked at the map again, I noticed a very thin scratch on one corner of it, as if someone had scraped it lightly with a fingernail, or maybe I had missed it when placing it on the desk. But that didn't make much sense to me. The scratch was on the very bottom right corner, and I had looked at that spot countless times. Someone had touched the map at that moment, My phone vibrated. A message arrived. The sender was a number I didn't recognize. The message contained only 3 words. You found it. The number was hidden. When I read the message, I took a deep breath. Fear, curiosity, confusion, and a hint of anger. Was this a threat, or was someone trying to guide me? Right then, the doorbell rang. The bell normally doesn't ring, it plays a short melody. But this time, it was as if someone was holding the button down. The sound lasted uncomfortably long. My heart sped up. I stood up. I walked toward the door with slow, heavy steps. The seconds passing between those steps felt like minutes to me. I looked through the peephole. There was no one in the corridor. They rang the bell again, this time shorter. I hesitated whether to open the door or not. Was someone playing games with me? Or had the person who watched me in the archive followed me? I waited for a while. Then I cracked the door open. No one was there. The corridor was empty. Silence. But an envelope was lying on the floor. The envelope was wrapped in yellow paper, and my name was written on it. I'll admit, seeing my name written in such old calligraphy startled me. This wasn't a coincidence, a prank, or an amateur joke. This was clearly an envelope prepared by someone who knew what they were doing. I picked up the envelope, closed the door, and locked it. I returned to my desk. I stared at the envelope for a while, then I carefully opened it. A single photograph came out. The photo was black and white. It looked very old, maybe from the 1940s, maybe even older. There were 4 people in the photo, all of them in priest robes. But what really caught my attention was this. One of the priests in the photograph, although I couldn't see his face clearly, looked very much like the man standing in the archive corridor, the one who didn't greet me. My throat felt dry. I looked at the back of the photo. There was a single sentence written in pencil. One of them is still alive. At that moment, time seemed to stop. My breath caught. I turned to the map. I looked at the stone. I looked at the message. And right then I realized I hadn't found a secret. I had been chosen so that a secret could find me. The room the Vatican thought it had forgotten in the heart of Rome, those crowded streets where thousands of footsteps mingle with tourists' laughter during the day, take on a completely different face at night. That night, following the note Gabriel had left, I was walking toward a back alley that almost no one knew in one of the oldest parts of the city. The hollows on top of the 2 marble columns standing at the entrance of the street looked like empty eye sockets when combined with the moonlight. As I walked slowly, I realized that everything here somehow seemed to be looking at me. The frescoes on the walls, the cracks in the stone, even the dust in the air. It was as if history was watching me. The only thing written on the note was, "The watchers of the night stand in the shadow of the Vatican, Gabriel." This sentence gave neither an address nor a clear direction, but as I walked along the street, I felt that I would find what I was looking for by instinct. Gabriel had done so much archival work with me that I knew how he hid his notes. His style was symbolic, not direct. Just as I reached the corner of Via Giulia, I saw an old worn-out door on my left. The metal post inside was slightly bent. On the door, there was a relief that had probably been there for hundreds of years, an olive branch and 2 cross symbols at its center, the same symbol. My throat dried. I approached the door. The moment I touched the knocker, I felt a slight vibration, as if the door were alive. Or maybe I had simply sunk too deep into this. I turned the knocker. The door opened with a heavy groan. Inside was a stone corridor. The smell of dampness had settled into the walls. The distant sound of dripping water echoed. I turned on my phone light, but it felt as though someone was following my every step. No sound, no movement. Yet I felt watched. At the end of the corridor, there was a staircase. It led downward. I counted the steps carefully as I descended because the stones were uneven. 1, 2, 3. Then a cold breath, as if someone had touched my shoulder and whispered, "Turn back." But when I turned, no one was there. When I reached the bottom, a small dim room appeared. In the center stood a round table, and on it a single object, a candle. But it wasn't lit, as if someone had extinguished it just moments ago. A thin ribbon of smoke was still curling upward. When my phone light hit the table, I saw it, a piece of paper under the candle. On it, a single sentence. He who seeks the lost treasure must first face his own shadow. Just beneath the sentence was Gabriel's signature. My heart tightened. Seeing his handwriting again after all these years, it gave me hope, yet shattered me inside, because this felt like a kind of testament. At that moment, I felt more clearly than ever that he might no longer be in this world. But what made the room truly strange was neither this sentence nor Gabriel's signature. It was the walls. At first glance, they looked like ordinary stone walls, but when I brought the light a little closer, I noticed something. Symbols carved into the wall, almost like a map. Curving lines, circles, old alphabetic signs, but one symbol was much more prominent than the others. A large circle in the center, rings around it, and on the outermost ring, an inscription, Custodes Noctis ex Archivum 7, the Watchers of the Night, Archive 7. Now my heart was beating even faster, because archive number 7 was the same as that elusive, highly disputed secret section in the Vatican unreal for years. Just as I approached the wall, something happened. Footsteps, this time clearly. From the corridor above, the sound of someone heavy walking on the stone floor. Slow, steady, like a rhythm. I held my breath. The steps approached the staircase. With each step, the sound grew closer. Thud, thud. They were now only a few steps above. I turned off my phone light and sank into the darkness of the room. My heart was beating so fast that I feared revealing myself. When I saw the shadow at the last step of the staircase, my throat tightened. It was as if someone was looking down, but I couldn't tell whether they had noticed me. Then a breathing sound, deep, human breath. Not wind, not imagination, real. And then a whisper, "You shouldn't be here." I couldn't see the face, but the voice. It felt as though it knew me. At that moment, the only thing I felt with my entire body was this: I was no longer just a researcher. The secret Gabriel had left had drawn me in, and this was only the beginning. The first journey of the sleepless scholar. Now, what the owl experienced that night still affects me, because what it did while wandering between those pages wasn't just examining a book. It was walking through the veins of history. As we moved through the pages in the silence of the night, the words began to sparkle like stardust. It was as if every letter was breathing, every sentence shifting slightly. At first, I thought it was because I was tired, but no. The owl's eyes saw something much deeper. It had realized that a story wasn't just a text, it was a living being. At one point, it paused among the worn pages. It fluffed its feathers and slowly lifted its wings. Believe it or not, the tip of its wings slid across the pages like a shimmering line. In that moment, it felt as though the time inside the book reacted to the owl's etch and stretched slightly, and suddenly, a faded drawing in the middle of the page began to glow. This drawing belonged to an ancient group called the Dawn Warriors, shadow warriors who swore to protect knowledge in a very old era of history. Normally, such a drawing would remain unchanged for centuries, but this one was different. The figures inside the drawing moved slightly, as if they sensed the owl's presence, as if a door of history had opened only for the owl. I leaned over and looked along with the owl. But to my eyes, it was still only a drawing. Sometimes knowledge doesn't appear the same to everyone. That night I learned this well. The owl suddenly turned to me, its eyes steady yet calm, deep yet reassuring with their glow, as if it was saying, "You must not tell anyone about this story, at least not yet." But at the same time, it was also saying, "If you want to understand the truth of what you see, you must come with me." And in that moment, I understood. This owl was not merely the silent guardian of the night. This owl was a guide opening the doors of history. When we turned the next page, it made a discovery that nearly took my breath away. On the edge of the page was a mark almost impossible to see. This mark was a secret symbol belonging to the ancient sages who drew the path of the unawakened. My hand trembled. The symbol was glowing faintly. It shouldn't have been possible, but it was happening. The owl approached the symbol, lowered its head, then, very gently, it touched it with its beak, and the symbol began to expand all at once. The surface of the page rippled gently. It was as if the paper had turned into water. I took a deep breath. Witnessing all of this opened another world inside a person. The owl flapped its wings softly and took a step into the swirling page of light. Then it looked back at me. From that look, understood there was no turning back now. The night the lost map awoke, the shadow at the top of the stairs wasn't moving. It just stood there, like a statue hidden in the dark, but it was breathing, and it knew I was there. Who was that figure waiting in the darkness? Someone Gabriel knew? One of the night watchers? Or someone entirely different who had followed me all the way here? There was a moment of silence between us. Time grew heavier. The darkness felt glued to the walls, completely still. If I took even the smallest step, the echo on the stone floor would give me away. Right then, the shadow took a step back. Footsteps moved upward along the stairs. Toke, 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 until the sound faded completely. I didn't move from where I stood for a while. It felt as if a pair of eyes were still watching me from the ceiling. Holding my breath in the dark made me realize something. To get out of here, I needed not only courage, but also intelligence. The symbols on the walls, under the trembling glow, looked like I turned my phone's light back on. Were shifting. Among those symbols, a single line near the center caught my attention. It looked almost like the starting point of a map. When I looked closer, I realized the line continued along the wall like a thin crack. As I followed it with my finger, I felt a faint vibration from the stone surface. It was as if the line was part of a hidden mechanism leading to another room behind the wall. I placed my hand on the crack, held my breath, and pressed slowly. From the bottom of the wall came a soft click, followed by the heavy scraping sound of stone. Then, the right section of the wall shifted inward by a few centimeters. A door. A stone door. My skin tingled, because mechanisms like this only existed in ancient temples or very old archive chambers. And this door was so silent and dusty, it looked untouched for years. I pushed the door further. The weight of the stone pressed into my shoulder. Finally, the inside was revealed. When the light from my phone spilled in, the objects inside stopped me immediately. Not a small room. It was an archive chamber. Locked drawers on the walls, old scrolls on the shelves, and in the center, a long chest covered with a red cloth. The air smelled of ancient papyrus, that dry, slightly sweet scent. It was clear this place had been sealed for years. I stepped inside. The door slowly began closing behind me. My heart raced. That closing sound, it meant the mechanism was automatic. I was inside now, and it couldn't be opened from the outside. When I fully entered, the room went dark. My phone's light formed only a weak circle, barely illuminating anything. I lifted the cloth covering the chest. A cloud of dust rose, scratching my throat. I opened the chest. Inside were several yellowed maps, a metal seal, a set of small leather notebooks, and on top, a thick scroll tied with red strings. The moment I held the scroll, the first thing I noticed was the Latin title written on it: Inventarium Obscurum Arcanum 7, the Dark Inventory, Secret 7. Goosebumps spread across my arms. This was the document rumored in the Vatican's secret archives, the one no one had ever proven to exist. Supposedly, it was a list of dangerous knowledge protected since the Middle Ages, but for years, scholars believed it was just a legend. I slowly unrolled the scroll. The drawings inside were made by an unsteady hand, yet they were detailed. On the first page, a large circular symbol, and at its center, a drawing of a chest. Around it, a Latin phrase: "The treasure is not unguarded. Whoever seeks it begins the awakening." The word awakening tightened my chest. Turn the page. The second page. And here was the real shock. In the middle of the page was a face, a man's face, long-bearded, tired-eyed, wearing old clerical robes. Below it was a name, Frater Gabrielis, Brother Gabriel. My hand trembled. This couldn't be my Gabriel. The name was the same, but the face looked nothing like his. This face looked like someone who had lived 600 years ago, but when I looked carefully, a detail caught my eye. Under this man's eyes were the same faint lines that had started appearing on Gabriel's face in the days before he disappeared. A similarity, an echo, a trace. It was as if Gabriel hadn't been chasing this ancient order, as if this order had already touched him long ago. Gabriel, what did you do? I whispered to myself, and just then, from the back corner of the room, from within the stone wall, I heard a faint clicking sound, then another, and another, as if someone was walking behind the wall, or something was moving. I pointed my phone's light at the wall. The stone surface was trembling slightly, and in that moment, a shadow slowly began to emerge from inside the wall, as if it was rising through the stone itself. The shadows twisted, stretched, took on a human form. Then, a very clear whisper echoed, "You're late." The voice? It was Gabriel's voice, but its tone was far deeper than any human voice. As night falls, the secret is revealed. The moment I heard that whisper, my feet felt glued to the ground. I wanted to run, but at the same time, I was questioning the truth of that voice. It was Gabriel's voice, but something was strange, as if the sound wasn't coming from a human throat, but from inside the stone, from somewhere deep where darkness was buried. Held the phone light closer to the wall. The shadow shifted. The surface of the wall rippled like liquid for a moment, then solidified again, as if someone or something was breathing on the other side of the stone. Before I could decide what was happening, a thin scratch appeared in the middle of the wall. The scratch widened and widened until a dark slit formed at the center. The slit slowly opened, and from the depth of the darkness, something emerged. No, emerged is not the right word. It slid into existence. A long black robe, a hood hiding the face, a rusty lantern in its left hand. The light from the lantern illuminated almost nothing. It seemed to make the darkness denser instead. The figure stopped without me even breathing. It turned its head toward me. There was no face under the hood, only a deep void, but that void was looking at me. Then it whispered, "The secret has awakened." An indescribable unease curled inside me. At that moment, I realized this. This was not human, not a guardian either. This was a shadow that had protected this room for centuries. Something without a name, without a face. Just as I stepped back, the figure extended its left hand toward me. The lantern's light flickered violently. Then, using Gabriel's voice, it spoke, "You came to find me. But first, you will find yourself." My head began to spin. Why was it saying this? Why Gabriel's voice? Where was Gabriel? While these questions collided in my mind, the figure slowly dissolved. It faded into the darkness with its lantern. The wall began to close again. Just before it sealed shut, something metallic fell between the stones. I approached it, picked it up, and froze the moment it rested in my palm. This was Gabriel's necklace, the one he wore the day he disappeared. My heart clenched. So he had come to this room. He had followed the clues this far, but why couldn't he return? On the back of the necklace was a faint carving. I scraped off the dust with my nail. A Latin phrase, ubi finis, ibi inidium. Where it ends, there it begins. What did this mean? Had Gabriel left this as a clue for me, or had someone else placed it here? I held the necklace tightly and stood up. I looked back at the chest in the center of the room. The scroll was still open. I turned to the last page. This page looked much newer than the others, as if added later. On it was a single handwritten sentence. "The true treasure is not gold. The true treasure is not what is hidden. The true treasure is what is forgotten." When I read this, a strange memory stirred inside me. As if something I had struggled to remember for years suddenly tried to surface, and in that moment I saw an image. A brief, dreamlike flash. Gabriel and I years ago. The day we first talked about these things, Gabriel had said to me, "If I ever disappear, don't look for me. What you must find is not me." I hadn't understood those words at the time, but now there was no more room to escape. A sudden tremor shook the room. The walls vibrated. A rumbling rose from beneath the ground as if the entire structure had awakened. The dark door began to open again, but this time, the whisper behind it was not Gabriel's voice. This voice was the tired, raspy voice of an old man, and it addressed me directly. "The treasure is almost found, but are you sure that what you seek is truly what you want?" I turned back in fear. A silhouette appeared inside the doorway. This time it wasn't a shadow. This time it was a person. Long white beard, faded monk's robes, silver staff in hand. When I saw his face, my blood froze. I knew this face, not just from the drawing in the scroll. This was the same face from the ancient frescoes on the walls, which meant something impossible. Standing before me was Frater Gabrielis, said to have disappeared 600 years ago, but his eyes were alive. He was breathing, and he was looking directly at me. Before I could gather the strength to speak, he slowly smiled. Then he said, "If you want to find the treasure, you must first understand why it was hidden, and I am the only one who can show you this." He extended his hand. "Come, the last secret hidden by Sleepless History. If you thought I would find a treasure chest at the end of this story, I was wrong. The true treasure wasn't gold. It wasn't a wooden chest. It wasn't a sacred relic adorned with precious stones. The true treasure was knowledge, but not the kind written in books for everyone to read. A knowledge capable of bending time. A knowledge that carries the memory of the past into the present. And a knowledge that, in the wrong hands, could turn the world upside down. The first person to understand this was Gabriel. What happened to Gabriel? Years ago, in the deep hours of the night, Gabriel pursued this secret and vanished. Official records listed him as dead, but the truth was different. That night, just like the experience I had with the owl, Gabriel had passed through a gate opened by ancient symbols in a manuscript. But that gate didn't open to a place. He opened to a time, and Gabriel never returned. At least, that's what we thought. How did Frater Gabrielis survive? The story of Frater Gabrielis has been a riddle for centuries, because in history there are two Gabriels. The young monk Gabriel who disappeared, and the old sage Frater Gabrielis who appeared 40 years later. Here is where the great secret reveals itself. They were the same person. When he passed through the gate, time threw him into another era, forcing him to live there for years. And when he returned, calendars had changed, but he was still alive. So Frater Gabrielis was a traveler who disappeared into history and returned. That delicate trembling of time I felt while following the owl, that was what Gabriel experienced. The same gate, the same light, the same knowledge. The so-called treasure was actually a manuscript, but far more than a manuscript, Codex Somniorum, the Book of Dreams. This book could preserve the fleeting images people saw during dreams for centuries, a kind of living memory. The consciousness of the dreamer was temporarily imprinted onto this codex. That's why whoever possessed this codex could witness the great secrets of the past. Sometimes, at the end of a long story, you know that moment when a person takes a deep breath. That's exactly where we are now. A moment when the darkness softens, your thoughts begin to grow heavier, and time chooses to flow a little more slowly. Tonight, we embarked on a very old journey together. We touched a secret that has been hidden for 700 years. We witnessed what the human heart can conceal and how a secret can travel through the fabric of time. But now, it's time to set all those tangled pieces aside. Right now, there is only you and the gentle silence settling around you. Take a deep breath. Let it out slowly. There's no need to strain yourself. No need to solve the story, challenge your logic, or think about the next step. Everything is in its place. Everything is as it should be. The night is wrapping its arms calmly around you. Maybe you remember the owl watching us from those old stone walls. The sound of wings blending into the darkness. Sometimes sleep is like passing through a doorway, but you don't need to push it open. You simply stand there, and the door opens by itself, just like Gabriel felt while wandering the halls of that ancient monastery. A moment where something gently carries you forward. You're not taking a step, but the path itself invites you inward. Now lean back, let yourself go. Feel the night a little more deeply. The silence in your room, maybe a soft breeze outside, maybe no sound at all, only the gentle rhythm of your breathing. Each second wraps around you a little more, calms you a little more, brings you a little closer to sleep. If your thoughts are growing heavy right now, that's perfectly normal. Your mind is telling you it's time to rest. You're leaving behind the rush of the day, the small details, the endless tasks. This story was a journey for you tonight, and journeys don't always end somewhere. Sometimes they simply slow down, softly, in their natural flow. Ahead of you lies a long night, a night holding a slowly approaching sleep. Your eyelids may already be growing heavy. Don't resist them. The world is a bit quieter now. They have their own weight, let them fall as they wish, a bit more distant, a bit more gentle, and you are right here, at the safest point of the night if you're ready. Let your mind guide you to its own gates of dreams, just like the ancient pages of the Codex Somniorum, gently, gracefully, without forcing you. I'm here, the night is here, and sleep is coming toward you, slowly, quietly, without touching, only holding you. I'll stop talking now. What remains is only the night, and your dreams. Sleep well, sleep deeply, sleep safely. Tomorrow, you'll wake up to a new story. Now, let yourself fall into sleep. And now, just before your eyes prepare to close, before you drift into the depth of the night, there's one small thing I want to say. If this slow journey has brought you peace, if you felt yourself take a breath inside this story, if even a spark of light flickered among your thoughts, what do you think about all this? How did this walk among ancient secrets make you feel? I wonder if there was a moment that touched your soul. You can share your feelings, your thoughts, or perhaps the very first emotion that slipped into your dreams in the comments below. Together in the silence of the night, maybe we'll build a new world. And if you wish to see the continuation of this journey, you can gently tap the like button and subscribe to this little channel of ours that opens onto dreams. Don't forget to softly ring the notification bell. That tiny bell will whisper into your ear right in the middle of the night whenever a new story arrives. Now, the night is speaking, the story is silent, and sleep continues to move toward you.